In 2003, Futurama was taken off Fox's schedule after 4 seasons. A decent run all things considered, but plenty of untapped potential remained in the 31st century. Shortly after ending, reruns would move to Adult Swim, where it cultivated a stronger cult following, strong enough that its movie, Bender's Big Score, was able to be released on DVD in 2007 and sold incredibly well. This meant more direct-to-video movies, which would eventually premiere in an episodic format on Comedy Central sometime later, which gave the network enough confidence to bring the show back in 2010 for 2 more seasons. Futurama's second life is one of the most inspiring resurrections in the field of animation. It wasn't a reunion or reboot, but a complete revival after spending half its existence in dormancy. But even though the fandom was bigger and less willing to take new content for granted, many found the Comedy Central episodes to be inferior to the Fox ones. I'm ultimately going to agree with that sentiment, but I'll need to explain myself.
Wait, why am I screaming? It got me too!
The 4 movies that were made in the late 2000s are typically considered the 5th season, since each of them is broken down into 4 episodes and reruns. But for this review, I'll consider it 4 movies. And golly gee, are they movies. The stories are bigger and more dense, certainly, but it's not like these couldn't have worked as episodes. They can get exhausting, even when they throw subplots into the plot, which usually only have very thin connections to the main story. With bigger tales came a bigger budget, and the animators were able to upgrade to high definition earlier than most other cartoons. But you'll hardly feel a difference, not because it was a poor transition, but because it was successfully seamless. Helps that they go from the movies back to the show format without needing to go backwards, like The Simpsons and South Park were guilty of. Since there's only 4 movies, I'll just offer my quick thoughts on all of them. Bender's Big Score was a middling first attempt. The humor wasn't all there, and the time travel is starting to get ridiculous. I've never time traveled before, but keeping one consistent method of doing it would have been nice. But Leela falling for Lars had a great twist to it which eases all the frustration that comes with it on your first watch. The Beast with a Billion Backs, this was just one long sex joke. Well, they combined it with philosophy, so I guess they wanted to say something about pleasure. Bender's game stunk. Futurama's characters are ill-equipped for high fantasy jokes, which is what the second half of this thing solely comprises of. My favourite was probably the last one, Into the Wild Green Yonder. Something about a casino on Mars, tinfoil hats, feminist vigilantes, and a black hole, but look, these are memorable set pieces, and all the characters have something to do. And it has potential ending number 2, with the Planet Express facing a wormhole that can take them anywhere in the universe, which is easily the most intriguing of the potential endings. But when they come back, they go straight back home.
How humorous.
Yes, it's sort of a Comedy Central channel, and we're on it now!
After a robot clone plot, they seem to have gone back to basics. A little too basics. Season 6 is pretty average in most areas, most except length. There was no standard for seasonal episode count before this, but for this span, it's shot way up to 26. They were stretched pretty thin, and while yes, there were still interesting concepts being played with, there were 2 fatal flaws that make 6 and 7 less than good. First, the characters aren't as stable as they were before. The best example of this is Fry and Leela's off-again on-again relationship being so forced that I wanted to skip episodes. But I watched every single one of them because being a critic means taking in everything a product is giving you. And Comedy Central Futurama gives me an increased reliance on catchphrases and jokes that aren't engaging. I roll my eyes every time Farnsworth says something blatantly hypocritical, for example. To this run's benefit, although they're not all there, the characters haven't changed fundamentally. At least the ones who still appear often, because there is some unfortunate sidelining. They still had the same writers as before nevertheless, and although they might have gotten a little rusty, they still respected the characters. One change that was natural and is a personal problem of mine is that at times, the stakes have gotten so wavy that they break the show for me. Some episodes like Rebirth and the late Philip J. Fry, great as the latter one is, have so much riding on them that I get disillusioned to any and all tension, especially in the less important stories. Can anyone else describe this? I can't be the only one who has this very specific problem with this specific show. But like I said, good episodes did come out of it. The late Philip J. Fry is a great bittersweet tale that shows you how as the future goes on, it gets more and more meaningless. There is no time like the present. Lethal Inspection has quite an odd reveal about Bender and Hermes' connection, but it gave me a tense adventure with a heartwarming, easygoing ending. I actually liked Mobius Dick quite a lot. It's Moby Dick and Jaws in space, with Leela getting so obsessed that she ascends. And Ghost in the Machines is good too. Bender dies, but his ghost haunts Fry through machinery until he needs to be sent to an Amish village, because that's what you do. But there were plenty of episodes that were either dull or pulled the rug out from under you, hurting you. The Da Vinci Code does the latter. I get that Da Vinci wasn't actually an alien that wanted to kill his own race of Renaissance scholars, but they could have made it less of an asshole plot. The Futurama Holiday Spectacular was the low point of anthologies, and of the whole series. The crew dies at the end of every story, and the third one is some very lazy Jamaican jokes. It really feels 10 years old. Utopia is a battle of the sexes, which is never a bad plot in and of itself, but this show's take on it devolving into cut-rate penis jokes is embarrassing. Oh, come on. Some bigger Futurama fans may have had some fun with it, but not me. I was also a little miffed with Law and Oracle and its very shallow twist. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me 100 times, come back with better stories, which they did for season 7.
Hello? Pizza delivery for... Icy Wiener? Aw, crud, every time!
While this isn't a massive improvement over 5 and 6, I felt there was a more active attempt to use the time they had left wisely. After potential ending number 3 proved to be open-ended but not as satisfying as the others, this whole season is an oddly touching farewell. Some of my problems with this era of the show remain, but they were slightly downplayed. Characters were still getting back on track, and the stakes are more balanced overall. Again, not enough to make this a good season, I was still getting a tired vibe from this show, but enough to remind me of why I had loved it, and why millions will continue to love it. Some of my favorite episodes in these last 2 years include A Farewell to Arms. The apocalypse is nigh, and there's no guarantee that everyone's going to survive. The ending does get extremely loosey-goosey, but they're still having fun and drama with it. Zap Dingbat is an episode that just works. Leela's mother falls for Zap in one of his few starring roles in this era. I appreciate that they gave Leela's parents their own episode to explore their interests and relationships. That was sorely missing since their introduction. Game of Tones was my favorite episode of the Comedy Central run. Fry has to dream about his last day in the 20th century so the crew can find an ominous leitmotif that's gonna blow up the world. Its messages about family and nostalgia are very well thought out, and they snuck in some overlooked but much needed development into the end. This leads into potential ending number 4, Meanwhile. Farnsworth invents a device that can rewind the universe 10 seconds, but only every 10 seconds. Then when it breaks and Fry and Leela are stuck in time, they live out a married life before deciding to do it all again when the device is fixed. I'll avoid the existential implications and just say this was a brilliant way to end the show, putting it in a seemingly endless loop where everyone ends up happy in the end. It's strange, but it works. We also get episodes that are strange but don't work. Fun on a Bun is the lowest won't they moment in Fry and Leela's relationship. They forget each other because the plot demands it, and in general it's just not very funny, nor does it add anything that other episodes don't. The Thief of Baghead is a parody of celebrities and paparazzi's symbiotic relationship, it seems. This new celebrity appears out of nowhere and can suck people's souls by being seen, and I really wanted to see what he looked like. It was an opportunity they stepped right over. Last episode I had serious problems with was Calculon 2.0, where it seems that Calculon is gonna start learning stuff about good acting, but he's still too shallow of a character for that even in his Spotlight episode, and that sort of dampers it for me. Not all of these episodes are terrible, but it's a struggle to remember anything positive about them. But it's that time of video again, crossover time. During The Simpsons' 26th season, they had a crossover with Futurama, during which a time capsule buried in Springfield in 2014 is radiated, and evil creatures come out of it in 3014. So Bender has to travel back in time and kill the Simpson responsible. Like most Simpsons episodes since the switch to HD, it's good for a few laughs at best, and televised white noise at worst. Having watched every episode up to season 30, it's incredibly hard for me to care about these characters anymore. But for what Simpsorama is worth, it throws them into a stimulating adventure that fits both worlds. The two franchises did cross over in comic book form years earlier, and I've heard that story's a bit better, but Futurama's grand return to Fox for one night only was an inoffensive time. But since 2014, Futurama has been off the air. Frozen, but not dead. Spin-off material is still coming out occasionally, and the events of the late Philip J. Fry were referenced in Matt Groening's third show, Disenchantment, so now all of his worlds are connected. However, I don't see it coming back again in the long run. For now, it has the one-of-a-kind title of being the Matt Groening show that ended. But just because something's over, doesn't mean it'll stop existing. And I think this show's still going to be remembered up to and beyond the time period it's set in. I typically don't review long runners, because I like to be both thorough and concise with my experiences, and there's plenty of Futurama that I neglected to touch upon for the sake of brevity. And that's because part of the fun with this show is watching it for the first time yourself. It had an unforgettable universe where tons of heavy subjects were tackled to the ground with comedy and heart. I'll always remember the characters, their quirks and relationships, and their place in life. But be wary, there's a short window of time you should watch it to get the full experience. It's great for anyone of any age, but it's perfectly designed for young adults. Now if you'll excuse me, I'll get back to more shows that young adults seem to like. Goodbye for now.
We're back to My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, on the Hub.